Dear youth, some of you may know me, some of you may not. My name is John, and hello. Thank you for saying hi. So I'm going to be sharing something interesting, and I hope our brothers will turn on the PowerPoint. And I'm going to try my best. I was given 10 minutes. I hope I can fit everything into 15. I'm sorry, a little bit more. There's a lot of information and the topic that you'll see on the first slide. So it was really hard for me to gather the information at first. But then I found something interesting that helped me with the information. So, as you can read, Christianity in the world. By show of hands, what do you think is the total? I'll give you three options of the Christianity of the world. Is it half? Is it 2/3 or 1/3 of the world? Let's go with 1/3. Raise your hand. Let's go with 2/3. Okay, good job. Number one was very close. So we're going to go into statistics. Brother Jim shared a bit about, we're going to go into some of the statistics. The reason I wanted to share some statistics so you can see what's happening and how Christianity spread. We'll see this in a short 1-minute video through the map as it spreads, and then we'll continue. So first will be statistics, persecution, and then a call to action. But before I begin, is this working? Okay, so a call to action. And Jesus came and spoke unto them, saying, all power is given unto me, heaven and in earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. We have a command from Jesus Christ to go and evangelize, to go and spread the gospel across the whole world. And the call of action is towards everyone here, especially here in the United States. And why here? And I'll tell you a little bit more based on the statistics. All right, so the spread of Christianity from the time of Jesus Christ to our time. Let's watch this really brief. It's about a minute. You'll see the history. It began from Jerusalem, and it spread. Then you'll see Islam. I'm hoping it's starting. It takes about a couple seconds before it begins. Give it some time. So the white is Christian, Roman Empire is red. We have the Byzantine Empire. Christianity continues to spread. Then we have Islam. During the Dark Ages, Christianity shrinks. But then again, that was the Mongol Empire, but it disappeared. So Mongolia is a tiny little country now. We're happy the Iron Age is gone. Okay, so 2015. You saw the communism that went into Russia, and people did not know how many Christians were there, but it went away. And there was actually almost twice as much Christians that were there. Okay, so this is a graph. Jim actually shared a similar graph, so I'm just going to continue and skip. You can see the early Christians and how they split into different groups, and how Reformation started, the Eastern and the Protestants, and so how the churches split. But Jim shared some of it. Now, David Barrett. The reason I wanted to share something about him is because of him we have the World Christian Encyclopedia. In 1957, he moved to South Africa. And what happened was that he was an aeronautical engineer. He built aircraft designs. Doing that for a year or so, they transferred him to build and design bombs. And he said, I can't do this because of my conscience. And he quit and became a missionary. And he had this thought in his mind that he should work and find out, in 1957, find out the Christians around the whole globe and the world. Starting from 1957 till 1970, for around 20 years, he traveled to 213 countries. Imagine, 1957, on ships, very slow. He traveled to 213 countries, and the first World Christian Encyclopedia was done in 1982. It was the first one published. It was a huge volume. And as you can see, some of the statistics, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but you can briefly see that in 1970, the total number of affiliated Christians were 1,130,000,000. Then in 1995, there was a revision. He was still alive. They got numbers from the locations that he went to. And then another revision was done recently. So the total number of denominations for 1970, so he spent from 1957 till 1970 collecting information about denominations across the whole world. And it came down to 16,000. Total number of denominations for 1995, it was 33,090. And for year 2000, it was close to 34,000 denominations. The reason I'm sharing this is because Jim has explained it more. There are 22,000 independent denominations. They're all considered Protestants, and we are part of them. There are Protestants that are 9,000. Marginals, they kind of fit in. Those are Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons. They fit in, but they don't. But they kind of do. So he called them marginals. Orthodox, Roman Catholics, and so on. But the majority is independent. So that is approximately, the independent is around 27% of all the Christians in the world. So this is just a brief about David Barrett. I have multiple articles. If you're interested to read something more about him, you can definitely come up to me and I'll give you the articles. So I will not go into more detail since of the timing. But if you're interested, look into David Barrett. He was the first that traveled the world since 1957 till 1970 and created an encyclopedia that we have on hand. And he collected census. He started off from Africa. He traveled to every location in Africa, continued into Europe, then went into China. He continued until he had the encyclopedia ready. And that was the interesting part. Now, we're going to continue on, and we will see something else. Is Christianity shrinking or shifting? And Daniel, when he wrote me a message, he's like, look into this. And I did. And I'm like, wow, this is interesting. U.S. is decreasing in Christianity and increasing in non-Christians. Therefore, if you become a Christian and you evangelize to others, that is a big plus. And the reason I'm using China there as an example is because China in 1975 was 0.3% of Christians. As you can see, in 2000, they were 6% of all Chinese. That accumulates to 100 million Christians. In 2020, approximately 15%, so over 200 million of Christians that live in China. In the 21st century, it is expected to increase from 32% to 35%, the Christians of the whole world population. And then the last is Africa became a continent with the most Christians in 2018. And Daniel said, look into this. The north is becoming less Christian, and the south of the whole globe of hemisphere is becoming more Christian. I myself was in China, and I've witnessed this myself. I lived in Taiwan for 6 months, and I did postgraduate studies there. And I noticed something interesting. On that island, 23 million people that lived there. Out of the 23 million people, around 64 were Buddhist, around 30-something% were Laos and Taoism, and then 0.34 Christians. But Christianity started to spread more and more and more. Why? Because Taiwan is an island. Therefore, communism regime has no authority over Taiwan. And America has a good relationship with Taiwan. Why? Because Taiwan is a hubber, meaning the ships come to Taiwan, they ship whatever they wanted to ship into China, and then from Taiwan it goes into China. So people are willing to listen. I was participating in those classes. We would invite people to study English, and we would take a passage and we would read the passage. And people would ask, what is grace? They don't know what the word grace is. And we explained to them, what is salvation? And so I've been in China myself, and I experienced this. Every Wednesday and Friday, we had sessions with classes in the university I went to. It was a great experience. We also had Christian people from Baptist Seminary in California, down close to LA. A group of 15 guys came over, and they went through universities to the groups that were down there. And I was even asked to stay longer, but I couldn't, had to go back, have a lot here. So just briefly, so that you would understand that Christianity is shrinking in certain areas. It's shifting down into Asia, into Africa, as you can see. And currently, if we look at the way it's moving, the Western countries, meaning America, Europe, are becoming less Christian. They become secular. Now the countries that were not Christian at all, they become more Christian. Now, I'll show this to you on another slide. This is a global Christianity. And so, in 1910, over 80% of the world Christians lived in the global north. By 1970, Christians could be found in of the world's countries. But their distribution among the countries region was still far from even. The global south was home to 76 of the world's population in 1970, but only 43 of the Christians. By 2010, the figure for each had risen, but the gap between them had narrowed. The reason I'm reading this is so you can understand the graph. Now, look at Europe, and in 1970, you see how big the blue sign is. That was the majority of Christians. Now, as we come to 2020, we see that Africa, Asia, is just exploding. People are more and more in those areas are accepting Christ. And supposedly, people say that in China, there's around 200,000. But it may be a possibility that there are almost twice as much. Why? Because the 200,000, those people are on record. There are video cameras inside churches, and the government, the Chinese government knows everyone that goes to church. What about the underground churches? The underground churches may be even more. So we can assume if the communism regime moves away, as it happened during the Iron Age in Russia, there might be around 300 to maybe 400,000 Christians in China. And that is a big number, but we don't see the exact numbers. That's just an estimate. And another graph, I'm not going to explain everything, but just briefly, you can see again the rise of Africa, Asia, and we see Oceania, and then North America, it kind of stays the same. The reason North America and our area stays the same is because we tend to live longer. And in a way, it allows us to be in that area where it doesn't change as much. All right, let's go on. Largest Christian population by country. And while it's going to run, I'm going to show you and talk, and I hope you enjoy this. So you're going to see USSR, and then USSR is going to disappear in the 70s, and it's going to turn to Ukraine, Russia, and immediately it will go up by the counts. So this is from 1948. So when David Barrett did the calculations, he went back and tried to collect as much data as he can, as back as he can. And then he tried to predict ahead also, what would happen ahead. But this is from 1948, and you can see how the numbers are going up. You see USSR, that's Russia, that's number 3, Brazil. The interesting factor while it's going is this, that currently the highest speaking language of Christianity is Latin, Spanish. Even though there are more Christians, supposedly, in Africa, but the first language, the highest amount of Christians is Spanish, because we have Ecuador, we have other countries that speak the same language. So the highest speaking language of Christians today is Spanish. And it's not American. That's the way it is. So if you see the yellow countries, there's only two. There's Nigeria. Nigeria currently is number 2 or number 3, the worst of persecution. Then Congo, that's another African country. And you'll see more and more African countries. Yeah, now you see Russia. USSR is gone, you'll see Ukraine. But if you see the yellow countries, those are the African countries. And they're gonna end up becoming more and more. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 African countries, almost to the top. And that is a brief statistics. I'm going to continue on. So global Christianity stats. Now this, I would like everyone to be attentive and to pay attention and try to read what you see. That was stats. We're going to go briefly into persecution of Christians. And this is a map, World Watch List ranking. The red countries are the worst in persecution. North Korea, Iraq. While I lived in China, in Taiwan, I flew to 5 countries around the island. And one of my ideas was travel with a purpose. Whenever I flew to another country, I had around 1,000 Bible tracts in my backpack. And I flew into South Korea. I spent 14 days in South Korea, and I was able to go to the DMZ, demilitarized zone of North Korea. It was really interesting to be and see there, and I've seen one of the biggest churches in North Korea. Also, the experience is just drastic to be there, to see those areas. Also, if you've seen Trump shake the hand of Kim Jong-un, where Trump walked the border, I was at that location, DMZ, and then after that, I flew to Singapore, and where the meeting was, I was actually there a day after the meeting. I wanted to be there, but the flight, they blocked the flight, so I couldn't fly into Singapore to see what would be happening. Because one of my other studies that I do is international relation and commerce, and I was thinking of seeing what would happen, because it was the last country in the world that is closed off to everyone, North Korea. And then we see Iraq, we see Sudan, all the red countries. Now, this is in a whole world perspective. In 2020, this is an article if you want to read about Nigeria. More than 1,900 families fled their homes from Nigeria. Why? Because in those villages, July 19, 2020, 18 people were killed, 31 were wounded. July 24th, we have a pastor that was killed. In total, around 812 people were killed in 2020 in Nigeria. And it's happening right now. Wherever Islam is prevalent, wherever Muslims are, they persecute and they injure as many people as they can. I would like to share a small story about a gentleman. His name is Yasir. He's from Egypt. When he was a teenager, there's a family that came from Sudan. Sudan is also one of the red dots where the persecution is high. A family that came from Sudan, that boy's name was Zechariah. And Yasir was a Muslim. He lived in Egypt. And this boy that came into their school was the only Christian. And so him and two buddies, they would always make fun of him. They would always do whatever they can. And then he hated this Christian person so much, this kid. They're both teenagers, that they agreed that when he would be walking home through the forest, they will jump on him and they'll beat him up. And that's what happened. After 2 or 3 months of Zechariah coming to school, he was the only Christian in Egypt. It happened in Cairo. And Yasir and two of his friends, they climbed the trees, they waited for him to come, they jumped on him, and they beat him almost to death. They beat him so hard that when Yasir saw that this boy couldn't do anything, he eventually, let's just stop it. They didn't want him to come. They wanted to purify their school, because their school, they have one Christian in their school. That shouldn't be happening. And so they left him there to die in hopes that he would die. They were around 15, 16-year-old, these 3 boys. And time passed on. In about 5 or 6 years, around 2021, Yasir came to God. He came to Christ. And he told his parents when he was around 21 that he became a Christian. And he said, that was the day when my dad cried. I never seen my dad crying, but he cried. And what they did was out of the ordinary. They kicked him out of the house. A week later, he saw his own picture in the newspaper. It's in Cairo, Egypt. And it says that this son is going to be buried at this time and this date. The following week, a whole procession happened. They carried an empty tomb, you understand? And they buried that empty box, wooden box. They put a physical tomb and they wrote his name and the time of the day of death when he told his dad that he became a Christian. And he's saying, to this day in Cairo, that tomb reminds me that my parents buried me alive. That's how harsh Islam is and Muslims are. Not everyone, of course. There are different ranks, but in the Shia Muslims, if you understand the difference, they're very radical, very radical. Let's go on, and I would like to share a little bit more. So most persecuted nations are North Korea, I said it, Iraq, Muslims, and then Last but not least, I would like to share this about Yasir. In 2007, 27 years after he became Christian, he flew back to Cairo. Why? Because Yasir became a Christian. He went to a seminary in California and in Florida. He became a doctor. He has doctorates in theology. And he flew to Cairo, to his own people, to preach to them. And he went from church to church. And he was asked to teach certain classes. And he was saying that after his third church that he went to, that was in 2007, 27 years went by, he saw a man that was walking towards him when he finished his sermon, and this man was limping on one leg with a broken left arm. And when he saw his face, he was confused who this was, because his left side was completely gone. There was no eye. And this man came up to him and he said, "Yasir, do you know who I am?" And Yasir said, "Not really." He said, "I'm Zechariah." That moment, Yasir said that I didn't know what to say. Zechariah moves his hand away because his hand was broken because of what happened. Those three boys beat him up when he was just a teenager. They broke his hand in 3 or 4 places. He couldn't do anything about it. And he was limping because one of his legs was broken because of that too. And he said, "I couldn't say a word." Why? Because I remember hitting him on his left side, and he lost his vision and was completely crippled because of me when I was a teenager, and I couldn't say a word to him. So Zechariah takes away his hand. He had a small bag, takes out the Bible that he had with him, opens it up, and shows him on the first page and said, "After you beat me up, I wrote your name down because you hated me the most. I prayed for you the most." And they both cried there. Prayer can do a lot. 27 years passed. Zechariah did not know that Yasir, who beat him up, ruined his life, became a Christian and became a scholar, and now is preaching the gospel. God does miracles. I can go on more and more about different countries, but we're short on time, sorry. So what can we do? First, we can pray. Send financial support like we've done. Paul and explained that we helped this family with the van. Then we can learn a new language and go as missionaries ourselves. Next thing I would like to read, something really interesting, is this. 2/3 of active missionaries are married couples. Another third are single women. The rest are single men. You get the point, yeah? Somewhere between 80 and 85% of all single missionaries are women. And let's read the last one. For every 10 single sent, only 2 are men. Dear men, this is a call for you. 8 out of 10 are women that go on by themselves to become missionaries, only 2. Maybe God is calling you out. This is an article more in detail about this. If you want to read, come up and I'll give it to you. Now, the reason I talked about languages, because this is very important. Today, the Deaf Bible has compiled a list of approximately 382 sign languages, and only a few have been translated. There's around 333 sign languages that are not written. There's no Bible in 333. Now, if we continue reading, World Federation of the Deaf people who use sign language for primary communication make up at least 1% of the global population. Now let's look at US. 1% may not seem like much, but that puts us at over 3.5 million people here in US that are deaf. They use sign language to communicate. Now, if we look at the global population, that's around 78 to 80 million people in the world that are deaf and they need Christ. Maybe you should learn a sign language. It will never hurt. Or learn some other language. And I would like us to watch this, and I'll be done.
The desert. A never-ending wilderness. Barren and desolate. But even here, if you look closely, there's life to be found. These are Yucca brevifolia, better known as a Joshua tree. This single tree could be hundreds, even thousands of years old. And that's because what you see is only part of the story. Underground, there's a massive network of roots going down to water, pulling that water out of the ground and storing it in the tree, keeping the tree alive, resilient to the desert wasteland. In the world today, 1 in 8 Christians are discriminated against, oppressed, even attacked, just because they follow Jesus. They are desperate voices crying out in a dry land.
When I became a Christian, my village turned against me. I no longer belong.
In China, the government installed facial recognition cameras in our sanctuary. That camera can gather the private data of our church members. They will intimidate them, they will prevent them from going to church.
Suna kone churches, suna ibe kayan mutane, suna kashe mutane. That means ana kashe Krista a wannan lokaci. So ina gani domin Kristanci ni nake gani.
We know from this year's World Watch List that 340 million Christians live in places around the world where they are discriminated against or persecuted because of their faith in Jesus. That number is hard to imagine, hard to get your mind around, but we know that God is faithful. In the book of Isaiah, God tells his people, I will make new ways in the wilderness and rivers in the desert.
In midst of persecution, churches are growing more. Through the persecution, God is making the church grow.
We are so united together like never before. We have a revival in our church, even in the severe persecution.
Saboda haka wannan ma ba za mu addu'a cewa ba, sai dai mu yi addu'a cewa Ubangiji Allah ya ba mu karfafawa wanda za mu jimre.
God has sent a river into the wilderness, and his people are resilient. Like the Joshua tree, they're living boldly in the desert, and they depend upon the church, the roots of his family, for water and support.
They are so encouraged by Christians from America. Pray for them, really care for them. It's like a body of Christ.
When you read the 2021 World Watch List and let it touch your heart, when you commit to pray for your brothers and sisters who are persecuted around the world for their faith, you're helping God make rivers in the desert and helping his children to stand strong for him.
The prayer is the core. When you don't know anything, just pray. When you don't understand anything, pray. You will understand.
Open Doors has been called into this work to strengthen God's people in the desert and to help them overcome the odds. Will you join us?
Open Doors is an organization. You can actually go on missions with them if you're interested. Open Doors, one church, one family. And lastly, I would like to leave this with you. What will you do, or where will you end up after this life? Have you done the commission that God has sent you for? Amen.